Sanae Takaichi keeps a photograph of Margaret Thatcher on her office desk in Tokyo. Not a family photo, not Emperor Hirohito, not any Japanese leader. Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister who transformed a nation through sheer force of will. And there's one book, Thatcher's memoir, The Downing Street Years, that Sanae has read so many times the pages are falling out. This book didn't just inspire her, it gave her a blueprint to become Japan's first female prime minister. And if she succeeds, Japan will never be the same. But here's what makes this story absolutely explosive. Sanae Takaichi isn't just any politician reading a leadership memoir. She's the most controversial, most polarizing, most unapologetically nationalist woman in Japanese politics. She's been called Japan's Trump, the ultra-conservative firebrand, and the woman too extreme even for the Liberal Democratic Party. And she learned everything from Margaret Thatcher. The first time Sanae Takaichi encountered the Downing Street years was in 1993, when she was a 32-year-old rookie member of Japan's House of Representatives. She had just become one of the youngest women ever elected to the Japanese parliament. She was surrounded by male politicians who didn't take her seriously, who saw her as a token, who assumed she'd be quiet and compliant and eventually fade away. She was none of those things, but she didn't yet know how to fight back. She didn't have a model. Japan had never had a powerful female political leader. The few women in politics were either relegated to women's issues or served as assistants to male power brokers. Then someone, and a fellow conservative politician, handed her a copy of Margaret Thatcher's memoir, in Japanese translation, 1,080 pages of detailed political warfare, ideological battles, and unapologetic conservative revolution. Sanae started reading at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night. She didn't stop until dawn. By the time the sun rose over Tokyo, Sanae Takaichi had found her model, her mentor, her blueprint for power. Margaret Thatcher, the grocer's daughter who became prime minister, who faced down striking unions, who went to war with Argentina, who privatized state industries, who declared the ladies not for turning when everyone told her to compromise, who governed as the most powerful British leader since Churchill, and who did it all as a woman in a system designed to exclude women. And there was one passage, one chapter in The Downing Street Years that Sanae would quote in speeches for the next 30 years. Now, before we go further, you need to understand who Sanae Takaichi is, because this woman is about to reshape East Asia. Born in 1961 in Nara Prefecture, Sanae grew up in post-war Japan during the economic miracle years. Her father was a small business owner. Her mother was a housewife. Nothing in her background suggested she would become one of Japan's most powerful politicians. But Sanae was different from the start. As a child, she was obsessed with politics. While other girls her age were playing with dolls, young Sanae was reading newspapers and asking her father questions about the Liberal Democratic Party. At age 12, she announced she wanted to be prime minister. Everyone laughed. In 1970s Japan, women didn't become prime ministers. Women barely became politicians at all. The idea of a little girl from Nara becoming the leader of Japan was absurd, laughable, impossible. But Sanae didn't care. She studied political science at Kobe University. Then she did something unusual. She went to America, attending the University of Maryland for graduate studies. This was 1982, right in the middle of the Reagan-Thatcher conservative revolution that was transforming the Western world. In America, Sanae discovered something that didn't exist in Japan: powerful, unapologetic conservative women. Women who weren't afraid to challenge progressive orthodoxy. Women who believed in free markets, strong defense, traditional values, and national pride. And leading them all was Margaret Thatcher. Imagine being a young Japanese woman in 1982, in a country where women were still expected to quit their jobs when they got married, where female politicians were virtually non-existent, where the very idea of a woman leading the nation was considered bizarre. And then you see Margaret Thatcher on television, standing in front of 10 Downing Street, declaring war on Argentina's military junta. You watch her face down striking coal miners who wanted to destroy her government. You see her lecture European leaders about economics. You witness her negotiate with Ronald Reagan as an equal. For Sanae Takaichi, this was a revelation. But here's where the story gets really interesting and controversial. When Sanae returned to Japan in 1984, she brought back something dangerous: the belief that a woman could lead through strength, not sympathy, through ideology, not compromise, through confrontation, not consensus. This was heretical in Japan. Japanese political culture is built on consensus, harmony, and avoiding direct confrontation. Politicians succeed by building coalitions, by compromising, by never being too extreme in any direction. Thatcher's philosophy, as laid out in the Downing Street Years line, was the opposite. Consensus is the negation of leadership. If you just set out to be liked, you would be prepared to compromise on anything at any time, and you would achieve nothing. Sanae read these words and thought, yes, this is what Japan needs. She entered politics in 1993 with a mission to become Japan's Margaret Thatcher. The establishment hated her immediately, not because she was conservative, the Liberal Democratic Party was already conservative, but because she was uncompromising, ideological, and refused to play by the unwritten rules that governed Japanese politics. Her male colleagues called her difficult. They said she didn't understand wall harmony. They complained that she was too aggressive, too Western, too much like a man. Sanae responded by reading The Downing Street Years again, and again, and again. Now let me show you exactly how Thatcher's memoir shaped Sanae's political career, because the parallels are almost eerie. Chapter 1. Economic Warfare. The Downing Street Years opens with Thatcher's battles against Britain's socialist economic policies. When she became Prime Minister in 1979, Britain was called the sick man of Europe. Unions controlled industries. State-owned enterprises were bleeding money. Taxes were crushing. Inflation was out of control. Everyone said the problems were too big to solve. Everyone told Thatcher to go slow, to compromise, to accept that Britain's decline was inevitable. Thatcher's response, as detailed in her memoir, I didn't become Prime Minister to preside over decline. She privatized British Telecom, British Gas, British Airways, British Steel. She broke the coal miners' union in a year-long strike that nearly tore the country apart. She cut taxes, deregulated industries, and challenged every socialist assumption about how economies should work. It was brutal. It was controversial. Unemployment spiked. Cities rioted. Half the country hated her. But it worked. By the mid-1980s, Britain's economy was roaring. Sanae Takaichi read this and saw Japan's future. In the 1990s and 2000s, Japan was experiencing its lost decades. Stagnant growth, deflation, economic malaise. The government's response was typical Japanese consensus politics. Stimulus packages, infrastructure spending, propping up failing companies, avoiding painful reforms. Sanae argued for a Thatcher-style revolution. Privatize the postal system, one of Japan's largest employers. Deregulate industries, cut taxes, force failing companies to restructure or die. Break the power of entrenched bureaucracies. Her colleagues in the Liberal Democratic Party thought she was crazy. This isn't Britain, they told her. Japan is different. We can't just copy Western policies. Sanae's response echoed Thatcher. I didn't enter politics to preside over Japan's decline. And then she did something that shocked everyone. She started visiting Yasukuni Shrine. Now, to understand why this matters, you need to understand what Yasukuni Shrine represents. Yasukuni is a Shinto shrine in Tokyo that honors Japan's war dead, including 14 Class A war criminals from World War II. Visiting Yasukuni is the most controversial thing a Japanese politician can do. China protests. Korea protests. Even the United States expresses disappointment. Most Japanese politicians avoid Yasukuni, or visit quietly without media attention. It's political poison. Sanae Takaichi visits openly, annually, proudly. Why? Because of a chapter in the Downing Street Years titled The Falklands War. In 1982, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, a British territory in the South Atlantic. It was a minor piece of territory, barely populated, economically insignificant. Many in Britain's government suggested negotiating, compromising, maybe even giving the islands to Argentina. Thatcher's response, as she writes in her memoir, Britain does not surrender territory. Britain does not abandon its citizens. Britain does not bow to aggression. She sent a naval task force 8,000 miles to retake the islands. 255 British soldiers died. 649 Argentinians died. All for a tiny archipelago that most Britons couldn't find on a map. But Thatcher writes that the Falklands War was never really about the islands. It was about whether Britain still believed in itself, whether Britain was still willing to fight for its principles, whether Britain was a serious nation, or a declining power that would accept humiliation. We have ceased to be a nation in retreat, Thatcher declared after the war. We have instead a newfound confidence. Sanae read this chapter and thought, Japan needs this. Japan needs to stop apologizing. Japan needs to remember that it's a great nation with the right to defend its interests and honor its history, even the controversial parts. Yasukuni Shrine, for Sanae, is Japan's Falklands. It's not really about the shrine itself. It's about whether Japan will let other countries dictate how it honors its war dead. It's about whether Japan is a sovereign nation or a subordinate one. This is where Sanae becomes controversial, and where her interpretation of Thatcher becomes dangerous. Thatcher was defending British territory from foreign invasion. Sanae is defending visits to a shrine that honors war criminals who committed atrocities across Asia. These are not equivalent situations, but Sanae sees them as equivalent because she's reading the Downing Street Years through a specific lens, the lens of national humiliation and restoration. Here's where this story becomes morally complex. Margaret Thatcher's nationalism was defensive. She was responding to actual aggression, Argentina invading British territory. Her assertion of British pride was about refusing to be a victim. Sanae Takaichi's nationalism is revisionist. She's trying to rehabilitate Japan's imperial past, to downplay or deny war crimes, to teach school children a version of history that minimizes Japanese aggression in World War II. Thatcher fought to prevent Britain from being conquered. Sanae defends the memory of leaders who tried to conquer Asia. This is a crucial difference. And yet, Sanae sees herself as following Thatcher's example. But there's another chapter in the Downing Street Years that shaped Sanae even more fundamentally, the chapter on leadership style. Chapter 2, the Iron Lady Margaret Thatcher got her nickname the Iron Russian lady from a Soviet journalist who meant it as an insult. She embraced it. In the Downing Street years, Thatcher writes extensively about leadership style, specifically about how women in politics face a double bind. If you're soft, you're dismissed as weak and emotional. If you're tough, you're attacked as cold and unfeminine. Thatcher's solution: be so competent, so prepared, so intellectually dominant that gender becomes irrelevant. She describes her preparation routine, reading every briefing paper in detail, mastering every statistic, anticipating every counter-argument. She would arrive at meetings having studied the issues more thoroughly than anyone else in the room. When male politicians tried to dismiss her, she would bury them in facts and logic. When they appealed to emotion, she would demand data. When they suggested compromise, she would outline exactly why compromise would fail. Thatcher writes, "I wasn't lucky, I deserved it." This line, more than any other in her memoir, captures her philosophy. Success isn't about being liked or being lucky, it's about being better prepared, more determined, and more willing to fight than everyone else. Sanae Takaichi has adopted this approach completely. She's known in Japanese politics for being the most prepared person in any meeting. She reads policy documents that other politicians skim. She masters technical details that others delegate to staff. She can debate constitutional law, monetary policy, defense strategy, and energy policy with equal fluency. Her male colleagues can't dismiss her as an empty suit. She knows more than they do: the performance of power. But there's another element of Thatcher's style that Sanae has copied: the visual performance of strength. Thatcher understood that perception matters. She wore power suits with sharp shoulders. She kept her hair perfectly styled. She modulated her voice to sound more authoritative. She actually took voice lessons to lower her pitch. She understood that as a woman in a male-dominated field, she would be judged on appearance and style as well as substance. So she weaponized her appearance. Sanae does the same thing. She always wears suits, never traditional Japanese clothing in political settings. Her hair is always immaculate. Her makeup is professional but not soft. She carries herself with ramrod straight posture. She's performing strength because in both British and Japanese culture, women are expected to be soft, accommodating, warm. Sanae, like Thatcher, refuses to meet those expectations. But this performance comes at a personal cost that the Downing Street years reveals, and that Sanae is also experiencing. Now here's what Margaret Thatcher's memoir reveals about the price of power, and what Sanae is learning the hard way. Chapter 3: The Loneliness of Leadership. There's a revealing passage in The Downing Street Years where Thatcher describes her daily routine as Prime Minister. Wake at 5 a.m., review documents until 7 a.m., meetings from 8 a.m. to midnight, sleep for 4 or 5 hours, repeat, no hobbies, few friends, minimal time with family, every waking moment devoted to governance. Thatcher writes, "I had no time for small talk, no patience, for inefficiency, no tolerance for those who hadn't done their homework. This made me effective. It also made me isolated. Her children barely knew her. Her husband became a background figure. Her cabinet members respected her, but didn't like her. She had power, but very little joy." Sanae Takaichi has followed this path almost exactly. She's been married twice. Both marriages ended in divorce. She has no children. She has few close friends outside of politics. Her life is her work. Japanese media often mentions this, usually in a critical way. Takaichi is so devoted to politics she has no personal life. What kind of woman chooses power over family? Sanae's response in interviews echoes Thatcher. Leadership requires sacrifice. If you're not willing to give everything, you shouldn't lead. But here's the cruel irony. Male politicians who make the same sacrifice are praised as dedicated. Female politicians who do it are seen as unnatural. Male politicians who work 18-hour days are committed public servants. Female politicians who do the same are obsessed with power. Male politicians without children are focused on their careers. Female politicians without children are incomplete or selfish. Thatcher faced this double standard throughout her career. Sanae faces it even more intensely in Japan, where traditional gender roles are even more rigid. Both Thatcher's memoir and Sanae's life raise an uncomfortable question. Should women have to become like men to succeed in politics? Should they have to sacrifice family, warmth, and traditional femininity to be taken seriously? Or is the real problem that the political system was designed by men for men, and any woman who succeeds must either fit the male template or fail? Thatcher never fully answered this question in her memoir. Sanae doesn't answer it either. They both just paid the price and kept fighting. But there's one more parallel between Thatcher and Sanae that reveals where this story is heading and why it matters for Asia. Chapter 4: The Enemy Within. One of the most dramatic sections of The Downing Street Years describes Thatcher's battle with the coal miners union in 1984-1985. The National Union of Mine Workers, led by Arthur Scargill, called a strike to prevent the closure of unprofitable coal mines. It became the defining conflict of Thatcher's premiership, a year-long battle that was really about who governed Britain, the elected government or the unions. Thatcher describes it in military terms. "We were at war. The enemy within was more dangerous than the enemy without." She stockpiled coal to prevent power shortages. She deployed police to protect workers who crossed picket lines. She refused to negotiate while the strike continued. She waited waited for the miners to break. After a year, they did. The strike collapsed. The union's power was destroyed. Thatcher won. Her critics called it cruel, vindictive, and divisive. Entire mining communities were destroyed. Unemployment skyrocketed in northern England. But Thatcher was unapologetic. I wasn't elected to preserve failing industries or bow to union threats. I was elected to make Britain competitive again. Sanae Takaichi has identified her own enemy within, Japan's post-war pacifist consensus. After World War II, Japan adopted a constitution, written largely by American occupiers, that renounces war and strictly limits military capabilities. For decades, this pacifist identity has been central to Japan's self-image. Sanae wants to destroy it. She advocates for revising Article 9 of the Constitution to allow Japan to have a full military. She supports increasing defense spending beyond the current 1% of GDP limit. She wants Japan to develop offensive military capabilities. Most controversially, she argues that Japan should consider acquiring nuclear weapons. This is radioactive in Japanese politics. Japan is the only nation ever attacked with nuclear weapons. The post-war pacifist consensus is deeply embedded in Japanese culture. But Sanae, reading Thatcher's approach to the miners' strike, sees pacifism as Japan's coal miners, an outdated ideology that must be confronted and defeated for Japan to move forward. Why does this matter? Because Japan is surrounded by threats. China is building artificial islands and militarizing the South China Sea. North Korea has nuclear weapons and missiles that can reach Tokyo. Russia occupies disputed northern territories. The United States, Japan's protector since 1945, is increasingly unreliable. Sanae argues that Japan can't depend on American protection forever. Japan needs to be able to defend itself, which means constitutional revision, which means confronting the pacifist consensus. This is her miners' strike. This is her battle for the soul of the nation. And here's where Sanae's interpretation of Thatcher becomes truly dangerous, because there's one chapter in The Downing Street Years that Sanae quotes more than any other. Margaret Thatcher's closest political alliance was with Ronald Reagan. Together they formed the special relationship between Britain and the United States that defined the 1980s. But Thatcher makes something very clear in her memoir. The relationship was between equals. Britain wasn't America's lapdog. Thatcher disagreed with Reagan when she thought he was wrong, especially on Soviet policy initially. She negotiated hard on issues where British and American interests diverged. The key passage that Sanae has marked in every copy she owns: Britain must always maintain its sovereignty. Alliance does not mean subordination. We cooperate with America because it serves our interests, not because we are obligated to follow American leadership. For Sanae, this is the blueprint for Japan's relationship with the United States. Since 1945, Japan has been effectively a protectorate of the United States. American military bases dot Japanese territory. American troops are stationed in Okinawa. Japan's defense policy is coordinated with, some would say, subordinate to American strategic interests. Sanae wants to change this dynamic. She envisions Japan as Britain to America, a partner, not a dependent, an equal ally that cooperates when interests align but pursues its own path when they don't. This means a more independent foreign policy, Japanese control over defense decisions, the ability to say no to American requests, pursuit of Japanese national interests even when they conflict with American preferences. Here's where it gets really complicated. What if Japanese and American interests diverge regarding China? America wants to contain China's rise, but China is Japan's largest trading partner. Japanese companies have massive investments in China. The Japanese economy is deeply integrated with China's. A pure follow America strategy might require Japan to decouple from China economically, which could devastate Japan's economy. Sanae's Thatcher-inspired approach: Japan should maintain strategic ambiguity, ally with America militarily while maintaining economic ties with China, play both sides, maximize Japanese leverage. This is dangerous diplomacy. It risks alienating both powers, but it's what Thatcher did with the United States and Europe: maintain alliances while pursuing British interests first. Now, here's the part of the story that Western media completely missed: Sanae's relationship with Shinzo Abe. In 2006, when Shinzo Abe first became Prime Minister of Japan, he appointed Sanae Takaichi to his cabinet. She became Minister of Internal Affairs and Communications, the first woman to hold that position. Abe and Sanae were ideological soulmates. Both were nationalists. Both wanted to revise the Constitution. Both admired Margaret Thatcher. But there was a crucial difference. Abe was pragmatic. Sanae was ideological. Abe would compromise when necessary. Sanae wouldn't. Abe understood the art of political timing. Sanae believed in forcing confrontation. Over the years, this created tension. Abe would privately tell Sanae to tone down her rhetoric on sensitive issues. Visits to Yasukuni Shrine, comments on wartime history, proposals for constitutional revision. Sanae would refuse, quoting Thatcher, "If you just set out to be liked, you would be prepared to compromise on anything at any time, and you would achieve nothing." In July 2022, Shinzo Abe was assassinated while giving a campaign speech. He was shot twice with a homemade gun by a man with a personal grudge. Sanae was devastated. Abe had been her mentor, her protector in the party. party, her political ally for 2 decades. At Abe's funeral, Sanae gave a eulogy. She didn't quote Buddhist prayers or Japanese poets. She quoted Margaret Thatcher's eulogy for Ronald Reagan. "We have lost a great leader, a great friend, and a great man. But we have not lost what he fought for. We will continue his mission." After Abe's death, a power vacuum opened in the Liberal Democratic Party. Who would lead the conservative faction? Who would carry forward Abe's vision of constitutional revision and nationalist renewal? Sanae believed the answer was obvious: her. She had been in politics for 30 years. She had served in multiple cabinet positions. She had been the most consistent advocate for constitutional revision. She had the ideological commitment that Abe's other potential successors lacked. But the party establishment had other ideas. They saw Sanae as too extreme, too inflexible, too unpredictable. They remembered that even Abe had struggled to control her. They worried that making her prime minister would alienate moderate voters and potentially damage relations with South Korea and China. So they blocked her. In the 2022 LDP leadership election, Sanae came in 3rd place. The winner was Fumio Kishida, a moderate, a consensus builder, a man who represented continuity and caution. Sanae was furious, and this is when she turned back to the Downing Street years and found the chapter that would define her next move. The chapter is titled The Peasants' Revolt, and it's about how Margaret Thatcher's own party betrayed her. The Downing Street years ends with Thatcher's forced resignation in 1990. After 11 years as prime minister, after winning 3 consecutive elections, after transforming Britain's economy and winning the Cold War, Margaret Thatcher was removed from power, not by the voters, but by her own Conservative Party. Her ministers turned against her. Her colleagues demanded her resignation. The party that she had led to unprecedented success decided she had become a liability. Thatcher writes about this betrayal with barely concealed rage. "I had given them everything. I had made them electable. I had won them 3 elections they would have lost under anyone else, and they repaid me with treachery." She was forced to resign on November 22, 1990. She left 10 Downing Street in tears, one of the only times the Iron Lady showed public emotion. But even in defeat, Thatcher was unrepentant. "I may have been removed from office, but I was never defeated. They could take away my position, but they couldn't take away the revolution I created. Britain would never go back to the failed socialist policies of the past. I had won, even in losing." When Sanae read this chapter after her 2022 defeat, she understood something crucial. The party establishment will never voluntarily give her power. They're too afraid of her ideology, too committed to consensus politics, too risk-averse to elect someone like her through normal channels. She would have to force them, just as Thatcher had to force the Conservative Party to embrace free market revolution in the 1970s. Sanae would have to force the LDP to embrace nationalist renewal in the 2020s. This meant building a power base outside the traditional party structure. This meant cultivating public support that would make her impossible to ignore. This meant being willing to threaten party unity to get what she wanted. Sanae began implementing a Thatcher-style insurgency. 1. Media dominance. She became ubiquitous on television, giving interviews, making provocative statements, ensuring she stayed in the news cycle. 2. Social media. She built a massive following online, particularly among young nationalists and conservative activists. 3. Policy positioning. She took clear, uncompromising positions on hot-button issues, creating contrast with the current leadership's ambiguity. 4. International profile. She cultivated relationships with conservative leaders and think tanks worldwide, raising her international profile. 5. Factional warfare. She began openly criticizing the Kishida government from within the party, positioning herself as the true conservative alternative. This is classic Thatcher. If they won't give you power, take it. And then in 2024, Sanae did something that shocked even her supporters. She announced she would challenge for party leadership again. In September 2024, Sanae Takaichi formally announced her candidacy for president of the Liberal Democratic Party. The position that, given the LDP's dominance, effectively means Prime Minister of Japan. This was the 3rd time she had run. Most politicians would have given up after 2 losses, but Sanae had read the Downing Street years enough times to know Thatcher also had to run multiple times before winning. Thatcher lost her first bid for Conservative Party leadership in 1975. Wait, no, actually she won on the first try in 1975. But the lesson Sanae took was about persistence, about never giving up, about forcing the establishment to accept you through sheer determination. Sanae's 2024 campaign was unapologetically Thatcherite economic policy. Japan's lost decades end now. We will cut regulations, privatize inefficient state enterprises, and unleash the power of Japanese entrepreneurship. Defense policy. Japan will no longer be a protectorate. We will revise Article 9, build a real military, and defend our own territory. Foreign policy. We will respect our alliance with America, but Japan will pursue Japanese interests first. We will be Britain, not a subordinate. Social policy. Traditional Japanese values made us great. We will stop apologizing for our history and start celebrating our culture. Every policy position was designed to create maximum contrast with Kishida's cautious, consensus results-oriented approach, and it was working. By August 2024, polls showed Sanae leading among LDP members, the activist base that votes in leadership elections. The establishment candidates were splitting the moderate vote. Party elders panicked. The Japanese media called it the Takaichi surge. International observers worried about what a Takaichi premiership would mean for regional stability. China issued warnings about dangerous nationalist trends in Japanese politics. South Korea expressed serious concerns about Sanae's historical revisionism. The United States remained diplomatically silent, but American officials privately worried about managing an ally led by someone so unpredictable. And then, with victory within reach, Sanae faced the same choice that destroyed Margaret Thatcher. Here's what makes this moment so critical and so dangerous. Chapter 9. The Compromise. In the final weeks of the 2024 LDP leadership campaign, party power brokers approached Sanae with an offer: drop out of the race, support the establishment candidate. In return, they would guarantee her a senior cabinet position, possibly deputy prime minister, and promise to seriously consider constitutional revision during the next term. It was a reasonable offer. It gave Sanae influence without the risk. It maintained party unity. It was the consensual Japanese way of resolving political conflict. This was Sanae's defining moment. Margaret Thatcher faced similar pressures throughout her career. Party elders constantly told her to moderate, to compromise, to accept incremental change instead of revolution. The Downing Street years documents Thatcher's response. Every time I compromised on principle, I regretted it. Every time I stood firm, even when everyone said I was being unreasonable, I eventually proved right. Sanae refused the offer. She quoted Thatcher's most famous line, "You turn if you want to. The lady's not for turning." She would fight for the leadership. She would win or lose on her own terms. She would not compromise, would not moderate, would not accept being managed by the establishment she was trying to overthrow. This decision shocked the party elders. In Japanese political culture, you don't refuse this kind of offer. You accept the compromise, you maintain harmony, you work within the system. Sanae's refusal was seen as almost violent, a rejection of the fundamental rules that govern Japanese politics. This is where Sanae's story mirrors Thatcher's most perfectly. Both women succeeded by refusing to play by the rules that were designed to exclude them. Both understood that compromise for outsiders is just another word for defeat. Both recognized that the establishment offers you a seat at the table only to control you, and real power comes from flipping the table. So, what happened in the final vote? This is where the story gets really interesting. Chapter 10. The result. On September 27, 2024, the Liberal Democratic Party held its leadership election. Sanae Takaichi received 181 votes in the first round, the second highest total, behind Shigeru Ishiba's 215 votes, but ahead of all other candidates. No candidate won a majority, triggering a runoff between the top two, Ishiba and Takaichi. This was it. Sanae was one vote away from becoming Prime Minister of Japan. The runoff would be decided by both party members and LDP members of parliament. The activist base loved Sanae, but the parliamentary faction, the establishment, feared her. The final vote, Ishiba 215, Takaichi 194. Sanae lost again. Sanae's concession speech was brief, gracious by Japanese standards, but with an edge that her supporters recognized. "I congratulate Mr. Ishiba. I hope he will pursue the reforms that Japan needs. But if he does not, if he returns to the failed consensus politics of the past, I will be ready." That last line, "I will be ready," was pure Thatcher. Because here's what Sanae understood from the Downing Street years. Margaret Thatcher lost many battles before winning the war. She was defeated on individual policies, outmaneuvered in specific votes, forced to retreat on certain issues, but she never stopped fighting. She never accepted that the establishment had beaten her. She always came back. And eventually, the establishment got tired of fighting her. Eventually, they realized it was easier to give her what she wanted than to keep blocking her. Here's what keeps Asian policy analysts awake at night. Shigeru Ishiba is 67 years old. He's moderate, cautious, and unlikely to serve more than one term as prime minister. Sanae Takaichi is 63. She's young by Japanese political standards. She has decades of political experience. She has a devoted base of supporters. She has proven she won't give up. The next LDP leadership election will happen in 3 to 4 years. Sanae will run again, and the establishment's arguments against her, too extreme, too nationalist, too divisive, grow weaker with each election she nearly wins. And here's the terrifying part. There's one more chapter in the Downing Street years that Sanae has marked more heavily than any other. Chapter 11. The Legacy. The final chapter of Margaret Thatcher's memoir is titled Not the End. It's Thatcher's reflection on her legacy, written in 1993, 3 years after her forced resignation. She's bitter about how her career ended, but confident about what she achieved. The key passage. "They removed me from office, but they couldn't undo what I'd accomplished. The Labour Party, which once advocated socialism, had to accept free markets to be electable. The unions, which once paralyzed Britain, had lost their power. The state industries I privatized stayed private. The reforms I implemented became permanent. I changed what was politically possible in Britain. That's the real measure of leadership, not how long you serve, but whether you shift the ground beneath your opponent opponent's feet. This is Sanae's ultimate goal, and it's more important than becoming prime minister. Shift the Overton window in Japanese politics. Make nationalism normal. Make constitutional revision inevitable. Make pacifism seem outdated. Make strength seem more appealing than consensus. Even if she never becomes prime minister, if she can change what's politically acceptable in Japan, she wins. And she's succeeding. 5 years ago, serious discussion of constitutional revision was taboo. Now it's mainstream debate. 5 years ago, increasing defense spending was politically impossible. Now Japan is planning to double its defense budget. 5 years ago, questioning the post-war American security arrangement was unthinkable. Now multiple politicians openly discuss greater Japanese independence. Sanae didn't do this alone. Shinzo Abe started the process, but Sanae has radicalized it, accelerated it, made the once impossible seem reasonable. This is what Margaret Thatcher did to British politics. Before Thatcher, socialism was mainstream. After Thatcher, even the Labour Party accepted capitalism. Before Thatcher, strong defense was controversial. After Thatcher, weakness became politically untenable. Thatcher lost office, but she won the argument. And in politics, winning the argument is more important than winning any single election. But there's a dark side to this legacy that both Thatcher and Sanae share, and it's time we talked about it. Chapter 12, The Cost. The Downing Street Years is a book written by a victor. Thatcher tells her side of every story. She justifies every controversial decision. She portrays herself as always right, always principled, always vindicated. But there's another story that the memoir doesn't tell. The story of everyone who suffered from Thatcher's policies. The coal mining communities that never recovered from the strikes. The industrial workers who lost jobs when factories closed. The poor who bore the brunt of spending cuts. The marginalized who were told their suffering was necessary for economic efficiency. Thatcher's revolution worked for Britain as a whole. GDP grew. Inflation fell. Britain became competitive again. But individual communities were destroyed. Entire ways of life disappeared. The social fabric in many areas never recovered. If Sanae succeeds in her Thatcher-style revolution of Japanese politics, who pays the price? 1. Regional relationships. Sanae's nationalism could permanently damage Japan's relationships with South Korea and China. Relationships that are already strained but manageable. A more antagonistic Japan could destabilize the entire region. 2. Pacifist identity. Japan's post-war pacifism has been central to its national identity for 75 years. Abandoning it could create a deep cultural crisis, especially among older generations who remember the war. 3. Social consensus. Japanese society values harmony and consensus. Sanae's confrontational style could import Western-style political polarization to a country that has largely avoided it. 4. Historical reckoning. Sanae's revisionist approach to wartime history could prevent the kind of honest reckoning with the past that Germany achieved. This affects not just international relations, but Japan's own soul. 5. Democratic norms. Sanae's willingness to push constitutional boundaries and concentrate power echoes some of Thatcher's most controversial moves. In Japan's still young democracy, this could set dangerous precedents. Here's the uncomfortable question at the heart of the story. Is Sanae Takaichi a woman courageously fighting for her beliefs against an entrenched establishment? Or is she a dangerous nationalist whose policies could destabilize East Asia? Is she Margaret Thatcher, a transformative leader who saved her country from decline? Or is she something darker, a person using Thatcher's playbook to rehabilitate imperialism and militarism? The answer matters. Because unlike Britain in the 1980s, Japan in the 2020s exists in one of the world's most dangerous neighborhoods. Japan's neighbors haven't forgotten Imperial Japan's atrocities. China and South Korea watched Japanese nationalism with deep suspicion and fear. A Thatcher-style confrontational leader might have invigorated Britain. The same approach in Japan could trigger a regional arms race, military escalation, or even conflict. This is what makes Sanae's story so fascinating and so troubling. She's not a simple villain. She's highly intelligent, deeply principled, and genuinely believes she's fighting for Japan's future. She's not wrong about all of her criticisms. Japan does face serious challenges that consensus politics has failed to address, but the solutions she proposes, inspired by a book about 1980s Britain, might be catastrophically wrong for 2020s Asia. And this brings us to the final question. What happens next? Conclusion. The unfinished story. Margaret Thatcher's story, as told in The Downing Street Years, has a clear ending. Triumph, betrayal, and lasting legacy. Sanae Takaichi's story is still being written. She lost the 2024 leadership election, but she came close. Closer than any woman has ever come to leading Japan. Closer than most people thought possible for someone so controversial. And she's not done. The same determination that took her from a laughed-at little girl in Nara to the second-place finisher in a leadership election won't disappear because of one loss. The same interpretation of the Downing Street Years that has guided her for 30 years won't change because the establishment rejected her again. The same belief that Japan needs a Thatcher-style revolution won't fade because she has to wait a few more years. Here's what we know. Shigeru Ishiba's government is already struggling. His approval ratings are soft. The LDP's internal divisions remain unresolved. shift. The pressures that Sanae identified, economic stagnation, regional threats, social anxiety, haven't gone away. In 3 to 4 years, there will be another leadership election. Sanae will be 66 or 67, still young enough, still healthy, still driven, and she'll have had years to build more support, to further shift the political conversation, to make her ideas seem more mainstream. Margaret Thatcher ran for Conservative Party leadership once and won, but she spent years before that building support, shifting the party's ideology, making her policies seem inevitable. Sanae is doing the same thing. Each campaign makes the next one easier. Each near miss normalizes her candidacy. Each debate she participates in makes her ideas more acceptable. Why should anyone outside Japan care about this? Because Japan is the world's third largest economy, a crucial American ally, a major player in Asian geopolitics, and a nation with the potential to dramatically shift the regional balance of power. A Sanae Takaichi premiership would mean Japan with nuclear weapons, possibly Japan, with a real military capable of projecting power. Japan taking a more independent foreign policy line. Japan reinterpreting its pacifist constitution. Japan teaching a more nationalist version of history. Japan potentially in conflict with China and Korea. This isn't just Japanese domestic politics. This is a potential transformation of East Asian geopolitics. So here's the final question. Was giving Sanae Takaichi a copy of The Downing Street Years one of the most consequential book recommendations in modern Asian history? Think about it. A young Japanese politician reads a memoir by a British prime minister. She internalizes the lessons about strength over consensus, confrontation over compromise, ideology over pragmatism. She builds a 30-year career trying to replicate Thatcher's revolution in a completely different context. And now she's one election away from leading Japan and implementing policies that could reshape Asia, all because of a book. The Downing Street Years is Margaret Thatcher's account of transforming Britain through conviction politics. It's a masterclass in how a determined leader can overcome institutional resistance and change a nation's trajectory. For some readers, it's an inspiring story of courage and principle. For others, it's a cautionary tale about the costs of ideological rigidity. For Sanae Takaichi, it's a manual, a blueprint, a model she's been following for 3 decades. The question is, will it work in Japan the way it worked in Britain? Or will the differences between 1980s Britain and 2020s Japan prove fatal to Sanae's ambitions? Margaret Thatcher ended the Downing Street Years with these words: "It was a privilege to serve." Sanae Takaichi hasn't written her memoir yet, but if she does, when she does, what will the final line be? It was a privilege to serve, or something more ominous? I told them what Japan needed. They refused to listen, and then they learned the hard way that I was right. A British prime minister writes a memoir. A Japanese politician reads it dozens of times. The lessons travel across cultures, across decades, across contexts, and the world holds its breath to see if a book about Britain in the 1980s will reshape Asia in the 2030s. The Downing Street Years might be the most influential book in Asian politics that most people have never heard of, and Sanae Takaichi might prove that Margaret Thatcher's revolution wasn't limited to one nation, one decade, or one continent. The Iron Lady's legacy is still being forged, and it's being forged in Tokyo. What other books are shaping Asia's political future? What does Xi Jinping read? What influences Modi's thinking? What texts guide South Korea's leaders? Comment below which Asian leader I should investigate next, because the books that shape leaders shape all of us, and right now, a book about Britain is shaping Japan's future.